Corinthians 12 through 30. Just as a body, though one, has many parts, but all its many parts form one body, so it is with Christ. For we were all baptized by one Spirit, so as to form one body, whether Jews or Gentiles, slave or free, and we were all given the one Spirit to drink. Even so, the body is not made up of one part, but of many. Now, if the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But in the fact, God has placed the parts in the body, every one of them, just as he wanted them to be. If they were all one part, where one the body be, as it is there are many parts but one body, the eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you, and the head cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable, and the parts that we think are less honorable we treat with special honor. And the parts that are unpresentable are treated with special modesty, while our presentable parts need no special treatment. But God has put the body together, giving greater honor to the parts that lacked it, so that there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for each other. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. Now you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is a part of it. And God has placed in the church, first of all, apostles, second, prophets, third, teachers, then miracles, then gifts of healing, of helping, of guidance, and of different kinds of tongues. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Do all work miracles? Do all have gifts of healing? Do all speak in tongues? Do all interpret? Now eagerly desire the greater gifts.
Thank you.
You are welcome.
Last week we talked about how important each person is and how we are uniquely placed in situations to fulfill God's purpose. Paul talked a lot about this idea, and he uses the human body as a dramatic metaphor, something everyone could relate to and understand. This image of the body as a communal reality is not unique to Paul. Although Paul is the only writer in the New Testament who uses it, other writers in the Roman world, especially politicians and philosophers, used the same image. Most often, the body was used to support the social hierarchy, whether of the family or the city, or especially as the empire as a whole. Politicians would use the metaphor to say that every body needs a head, and in society, the head is provided by the wealthy and the elite and the rulers. And everybody needs hands and feet to do the hard and dirty work. That was provided by society, everyone else. But Paul, in his rebellious way, draws on the same image but turns the point in a very different direction. The unity of the body does not, in fact, mean that less honored members get abused and treated roughly. Rather, all parts of the body belong to one another. The supposedly weak parts are treated with special care. The end result of the body metaphor in Paul's hands is not the same old hierarchy, or even the inverse of that culturally expected pattern of domination with new people placed at the top. But it's a deep unity of the whole body, with each part being cared for each other. Let me just say, I don't like feeling weak. I hate this. I hate this. Being weak, it's like being at a disadvantage or being even at fault. deficient or fragile or feeble or imperfect. And if I am blessed to be strong, and after all, strong is the opposite of weak, right? Then I'm in control. And perhaps I don't like to feel weak because when I'm weak, it means I'm not in control. This last week, I had to have a test at the hospital, and there's nothing wrong. It's just one of those tests that you're not supposed to drive afterwards. So I had to ask someone for a ride. That meant they would have to come and pick me up and drive me to the hospital in Baropa, and then come back several hours later to pick me up to take me back home. This scenario in my mind is a huge ask. I mean, do you understand how completely odd that is? Some of you maybe know, but I absolutely did not like that I needed to ask someone to help me. I gave a great deal of thought to this. I considered driving myself anyway and just waiting until I was really awake and then being able to drive, but it's not really safe to do that, right? And I didn't know how I was going to feel after my test. So then I went through this internal process of pre-qualifying who I could ask. Somebody who would be dependable, somebody who didn't work during the time that I needed a ride, somebody who would be able and available to go, somebody who wouldn't think that my asking them was going to be an imposition. Oh God, why did I struggle with this so much? I didn't like thinking that I was going to be a burden to someone else. So I asked Debbie Groves from the New Hope Church, if you know her. Of course, she was immediately, of course I'll help you, and in her genuine way, she was so happy to do it. Still, I disliked having to rely on another person. I've been independent for a very long time, and it was really hard to even ask. Like it's an imposition to have somebody else give me some of their time. And also this week, I got a call from another person who was having car trouble. And they needed a ride to take a key to where their car was stuck by the side of the road. They had gotten a ride back home, but they forgot to leave their key with the car so that the wrecker company could take it with them. What a simple request. It was well within my capabilities. I had time to do it. I was overjoyed to be able to help this person. It never crossed my mind that it was going to be a burden or an imposition to help them. So why do I think it's my right to steal the joy of helping from another person? That makes sense? Why does my independence take priority over the gift of allowing another person to use their gift of generosity and caring? My strength is my weakness. My tendency to want to do it all myself. That's a weakness. That's my weakness. Some of you are nodding. You can relate to that, right? There's this kind of inversion thinking happening in Paul's letter around weakness. And that theme of weakness in 1 Corinthians has basic social and economic dimensions. The irony of the situation at Corinth is that spiritual gifts were the basis for claims of prestige and preeminence. And this is what Paul is addressing. He's reminding the Corinthians that God primarily calls the weak. God calls those without status rather than the noble-born and the powerful. And he insists that such cultural weakness characterized in his own ministry, in Paul's own ministry, is in a foundational way characterized in Jesus' crucifixion. The socially and economically weak cannot be despised or rejected or marginalized in the church or by the church. Because God's power is in the fact at work in what the world sees as weakness. So today we tend to give weakness another name. We call it neediness. In the Corinthian church, the weak and the needy were really being despised and shunned by others. And this body metaphor by Paul calls the church to a better way of life together. Differences of abilities and availabilities within the church, and yes, in our society, are something that God has arranged. Imagine that. It means that we are each needed and necessary. And yeah, here's the hard part for some of us. We need each other. So perhaps this memorable and maybe familiar allegory will illustrate this. Legend has it that Rabbi Haim of Roshimashab, Lithuania, is an itinerant preacher, and he was given the opportunity to visit both heaven and hell. And he had an angel as his guide, and the rabbi is first ushered through the gates of hell. And he's surprised to find that they're made of finely wrought gold. The gates are exquisitely lovely, as is the lush green landscape beyond. And he looks at the angel guide in disbelief and says, "It's all so beautiful. The sight of the meadows and the mountains, the sound of the birds singing in the trees, the scent of the flowers, and then the tantalizing aroma of a gourmet meal catches his attention." Entering a large dining hall, he sees row after row of tables laden with platters of sumptuous food, yet the people seated around the tables are pale and emaciated and moaning in hunger. Coming closer, he sees that each person is holding a long spoon, but their arms are splinted with wooden slats, so they can't bend either elbow to bring the food to their mouth. The angel then took the rabbi to heaven, where he encountered the same beauty he had witnessed in hell. The same golden gates, the same stunning landscape. And entering the dining hall there, he saw the same scene, with people sitting at the tables with their arms splinted with wooden slats. Except in contrast to hell, the people at the table were sitting contentedly, cheerfully talking with each other, fully enjoying their sumptuous meal. I don't understand. And God smiled and he said, "It's simple. Love only requires one skill." These people learned early on to share and to feed each other. It was then the rabbi understood heaven and hell offer the same circumstances and the same conditions. The only difference is in the way that people accept and treat each other. In these last several months, we've heard a lot about diversity and appreciating the uniqueness of each person, especially in our United Methodist Church. I just want to say I believe that each person is a loved child of God. Diversity within the church community is not something to be tolerated or regretted or manipulated for one's own advantage, but something to be received as the gift that it is. And we can learn something about ourselves from each child of God. And yes, I am wrestling with what this means personally in a practical application in tomorrow's United Methodist Church. And we will explore this more and about what this means for us as we find out what the General Conference decisions are at the end of February. Paul implies here that not only diversity, but unity in diversity is a strength and a reality without which the church cannot live. We like to confuse unity with uniformity because it's much easier to gather people together who are like ourselves than it is to reach across divisions which mark our culture. But unity is not about sameness. I would ask, does this church truly reflect the ethnic, the social, the age, and the economic diversity of our community? I mean, I would see our congregation as fairly homogeneous. And we're okay with that. But I read Paul and I just shake my head. Here was a man who never studied personally with Christ. But yet he clearly speaks the themes of Christian teaching, and his words have so much significance for us urges, that's not right, Paul insists on something richer than a homogeneous church. The church is intended to be a foretaste of the final reconciliation of all things that God promises. And so Paul calls on the church at Corinth to start acting like a social body that has its origins in the crucified body of Christ. He says diversity within the church is not a problem to be avoided or solved or managed, but it's a gift of God's grace and a sign of the Spirit at work. The differing gifts that bind and form us in such a way that we do indeed, we must belong to one another. There's so much greater value in caring for each other, especially those who are deemed by societal convention to be weaker and less honorable members of the social body. Christ's ministry did not take him to the wealthy homes and the privileged people. Christ gave his priority to the weak and the rejected, the poor, the sick, and yes, the needy. Those who would never be in any position to really return the kindness that he showed them. So really, children of God, are we not all subject to times in life when we know sorrow and pain and need of every kind? This week, I was in need, this much need. And I struggled to ask for help. But I did, and the body of Christ responded. It was just as easy and just as hard as that. I know you are willing to help others. I've seen you do it. But are we willing to allow ourselves to be helped? This one, to help. Humble yourself.